Having a Gas is the podcast that chats to the great and the good of the creative industries, and in particular finds out what makes great music for film, for TV, for commercials, for cooking to, for dancing to, f***ing to, and more. Today I'm having a gas with Simon Long, the Executive Creative Director of Intermarketing, one of the fastest growing agencies in the UK. Simon has worked with some of the top brands and agencies in the UK, including a stint as M&C Saatchi's art director, and is now helping Intermarketing develop a unique brand building strategy. What's London like at the moment?
London is claustrophobic.
Yeah?
Yeah, still working from home. Weather's not too bad. It's all good. Just got into our groove, really.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
I think from a creative perspective, it's worked out really well. Bit of headspace.
Great.
What about you guys?
So we were working on a major national TV campaign about a week before lockdown happened. And while I don't know if I'm available to talk about the brand, the fact is it was a public transport, and so we were all guns blazing, running as fast as we can. And then a week later, it was they're not going to be advertising public transport for at least a year. So yeah. So that went down. But yeah, so we've got this office in this studio here, and it's the rooms are all separated by these partitions, and so we finished building the studio, did about a month working from home, and then I can walk here from where I live, so I've just been coming in here to do work for a few weeks now, and
Okay.
yeah, it's all good. So and we've been able to keep up and running. So tell me how your creatives and Intermarketing generally have responded to the crisis.
I mean, it's like everyone, it hits pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It was kind of a very much think on your feet, and I guess logistically it was okay from London and Manchester and the New York offices because we're relatively small.
Yeah.
So it was the case of literally pack up your tools, get home, set up at home. Leeds, which is our biggest office, was a bit more logistically a bit of a nightmare. But I think with everyone, we just thought on our feet, we sort of turned it around, everyone went home, everyone kind of got on board with it. And you make it happen,
Yeah.
It's, like I said, having Zooms, having Teams, it's just kind of like refocused the way we work, and from a creative perspective, I found it really beneficial. It's the guys have got a lot more headspace. They can kind of, and to me, what I like about it, creative isn't a 9-to-5 job. It's 24/7. There's always something you're thinking about or mulling it over. So to have the kind of the freedom, and don't get me wrong, it's a very sad situation, and from a pandemic, but from a professional perspective, I've always likened it to being on holiday. Don't wear a watch because there's no schedule. So if people want to get up early, crack on, have a break a bit later, go for a run, play with the kids, whatever they want to do. It's kind of, it's leaving creatives to their own devices, and they'll find their own groove. As long as the work gets done, which it gets done to the standards required, which it is, it's fine. I think in many ways it's quite kind of, it's quite inspiring, really.
Yeah.
A lot of my team have found different ways to work and almost kind of opened up different creative kind of avenues to explore personally, which they can then bring back to the team as and when we start to kind of congregate again.
Yeah. Do you feel like you'll take something from this going forward in the way that you work with your creative team? Are you going to try and keep that kind of flexibility? It's like the job's, as you said, to rephrase, the job's kind of 24/7 as it is. So as long as the work gets done, we can have some flexibility with the schedule.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that's it. You've got to take the positives from this. From us, from even from logistics, we don't need to keep travelling everywhere. What I like about it, it gives, hopefully, the creative guys have a confidence that they can actually step away and use their time productively. As long as we know when the deadlines are, how they use that time is up to them. Mm-hmm. Some people get up early, some work late, some people just might do nothing for 2 days and they might hit spark of brilliance. Exactly, whatever the best way of working is for the guys and how they can start to sort of bring that into the process, absolutely fine with. And even for me, at sort of my level, I still want to learn from the guys. What I do isn't right. It's right for me, but I'm still open to learning. So I think it's been great. It's been a really enlightening process, I think.
Cool. I'm interested to learn from you about Intermarketing as a group more generally, because you're the ECD, but as you said, you've got offices London, Manchester, and Leeds. And are you supervising the creatives as well as New York? Are you supervising the creatives across all of those teams?
Yeah, it's a strange one because historically, like, we're a northern company set up in Leeds about 25, 30 years ago. I came on board about 5.5 years ago when there was a buyout, sort of fresh blood, fresh thinking. It was historically more a kind of design and production house. And they wanted to be more kind of creative, strategically led, push
Yes.
the creative boundaries. So I came on board to set up and head up the London office. The same time we opened the New York office and the Sydney office. And then not long after, we opened up the Manchester office and the Amsterdam office. So in the space of a couple of years, it really grew.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, from my perspective, it was just sort of like come on board and kind of shake the creative up a little bit. We've got I've got my creative partner, a fellow ECD. He's based in the Leeds office, and he's more the operational side of things. So the design and production, I'm more kind of the face of it, I guess. So I guess it's kind of a twofold process of keeping the kind of the northern roots of production, and our personality and our kind of and our process, because that makes a lot of money for us and it's going really well. We start to bring in kind of a new creative thought process, more strategic, start to look at kind of tech and innovation. So that's kind of my job, and I think that's where it's going. So I guess, looking from the industry in and how we can start to sell our product more to the outside world.
Yeah. So I get the impression you just said that the growth is has been quite quick, crammed into a few years. Can you speak at all about what the ambitions are for Intermarketing? Where you want to be placed in the industry, how you want to be seen. Are you looking for that sort of top 10 spot with the Ogilvies and the Adam and Eves of the world?
Not really, I don't think. I think we want to be, our vision is to be the most connected agency in the world. And by that, we mean from a consumer perspective, from a cultural perspective, from a commerce perspective. And I think, you look at the big agencies, like you just mentioned, the Ogilvies, the BBH, they're great, and they're well-oiled machines. But I think what we do is slightly different, where we're not just kind of a creative agency, we're not just a design agency, we're not just a production agency, we don't just do retail, we kind of do the whole shebang. So we won't just come up with an idea. I think that's where we're going with being more connected. We can actually start to do the whole entire consumer journey. And it's something we've just launched actually recently. We sat down last year, and similar to what you said about the big agencies, all the big agencies talk about the big idea. What's the big idea? What's the big idea? And to me, I think the big idea is almost becoming obsolete now in this industry. Big ideas, they come, they go, they kind of get lost, Whereas years ago, you'd spend a lot of money on a lot of budget on a TV spot. TV spots aren't really there anymore. And we started playing around with, it's more about the long idea, thinking longer, not bigger.
Yeah.
Where it's more about the long ideas, they start earlier, they last longer. They run longer across, culture, commerce, consumers, channels. So that's how we're starting to work now. And that's what I mean by connected. So rather than just think of a big idea, we do a big TV spot. Let's start to understand the consumer. They start online, they go in store, they go across social. How do we attract them? How do we involve them?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we started to go, where maybe that's our kind of point of difference from the bigger agencies, where it's not just like, here's a big, glamorous, beautifully crafted campaign. We're doing more kind of the end-to-end. So we don't just create a seamless kind of customer journey. We hit the relevant touch points along the way, but we make it happen as well, and we can do the production. So I think that's where we're starting to find that it's really resonating with our clients, especially the lifestyle ones, where it's all about consumer first rather than just client or channel.
I like this, and I like the idea of the long idea. Do you think you could give some examples that are in culture already, or like in the creative world of an idea that didn't necessarily blow all of its budget in one go, but actually just had a much flatter curve, to use a popular term right now. So I'm getting the impression from what you're saying, the big idea, a big spot, a big budget thing, is like the John Lewis advert. It's on once at the end of the year, and it doesn't run for the rest of the year, and then there's a new one next year. Whereas a long idea might be
Yeah, I mean, a good example, our main client is Adidas. We do a lot of work for Adidas. And if you look historically, they've done some amazing spots, big ideas. You look at the one where they had the Beckham, the Noel Gallagher and Daft Punk,
Yeah.
big, it was shareable. But again, you're talking at the consumer, and in this day and age, they want to be part of it, especially with a brand of Adidas. They want to feel part of Adidas. So I think, thinking longer for them is starting to involve and incorporate the consumer in their campaign, make them part of the brand. So you can see how a brand like Adidas, for example, have progressed from just kind of showing these great spots and being aspirational to being more kind of invitation led in terms of like, you can come in and be part of this brand. And we've done a lot of stuff in the flagship stores with like Superstar, where they come in and create their own kind of Adidas gear. They become on Regent Street, they can become part of the campaign, standing alongside Pharrell Williams and David Beckham.
Yes.
We did something last year where we did Adidas Creators, where we did the main stores of London, New York, Paris, Milan, I believe, and we handpicked some kind of young, fresh creators, whether they were kind of in the music industry, the ad industry, wherever it might be, and they came on board and very much kind of a collab with the brand to see what the different cultures were in the different cities, but started to bring them together. So that's kind of where we're thinking where the long idea can lead to, where it's not just an ad campaign, it starts to kind of go further into kind of culture and commerce.
Yeah, I also like how the long idea hooks onto a current concern, because the big idea is not sustainable necessarily, whereas long sounds like it hooks onto sustainability, and that's becoming more and more relevant and more important to people, that what you're doing now, you have to be able to do tomorrow, next week, next year. And obviously the obvious example would be climate action, people saying, we need things here to be sustainable for a long time, and this is bringing that idea into the creative world.
I mean, if you look what we do, it's sell stuff, build brands, influence change. And I think exactly to your point, it's the last point. How do you influence change? And what we want to start doing with thinking longer is it almost becomes like a mindset, like that kind of frontier mentality. So I want the guys to start thinking forwards, be the forecast, not the follow-up, and if we're working on for like Adidas, what is the future? Thinking longer, what is retail? It is probably sustainability, like you said. It's probably innovation. If we can then start to kind of, I liken it almost like a crystal ball and a compass. You start to imagine the future, and then you can start to plot a path to get there. And I think if we can then start to have more of these kind of like lifestyle brands, and the campaigns we do are more embedded in culture and they involve the consumer, it just gives it that longevity. Like you said, rather than just have a TV spot that kind of is played, we've got some media space and it goes again. It's really kind of embedding the consumer in kind of the ethos and the ecosystem of these brands.
Yeah. I like. I see some brands. Obviously, we're still in the COVID-19 lockdown. It's very much front of mind for this year. It's been the most important thing that's happened. That's not going away. We don't know where it's going to go, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because some brands, some products have done surprisingly well out of COVID-19, Zoom being one of them. And so would you be thinking about approaching those kind of clients? Because obviously Zoom don't do much above the line advertising, and saying, well, one good thing about Zoom is we can do this. I'm in Manchester, you're in London, I don't have to get a train to London anymore, spend a fortune, cost a load of carbon, and yet here we are meeting, so you can grow your business from home without flying around and training around.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think we need to tell brands that, do we? I think it's so kind of obvious, but I think there is definitely that. I think sustainability, and also I think the big thing to come out of this, to touch on what you just said, was like brands have got to feel sincere. They've got to feel real, and we've had it where, brands want to do this and they suggest stuff. And it's like, but if you're not already doing it, or you're not voicing it, it's just going to sound false. It's just going to fall on deaf ears, or it'll have a detrimental effect. You don't just jump on the bandwagon because, of whatever reason. I think this is what we're trying to get to with thinking longer. It's almost kind of, right into your future self. Where do you want your brand to be? I think at the moment, we do live in an age of short-termism, where it's kind of that immediate gratification. It's like, everything's got to be done. There's targets to be hit. But what we're trying to do now with our key clients is get them to almost like stop for a minute and almost go, look, where do you want to be? Where do you want your brand to be? What's your kind of, and then what's beauty? I think this is a great time. The world's almost come to a halt and it's stopped. It's a good time to reflect and look back.
Yes.
And to your point, look what brands are doing now. Look what technology's doing now. Look, we work in the communication industry. Look at communications. So it's almost a kind of an exercise that we're trying to sort of help our clients with. And then we've likened it to if you look at it in terms of time horizons, it's the now, the near, the next. So if we can start to look at it that way and go, okay, what can we do now? What's the immediate impact we can do now? How can we start to plan in the near? And then what can we do to be a bit more proactive? I mean, that's the key to the brands going forward. And to your point, I think, it's the biggest thing to come out of me looking at kind of the best brands that are doing stuff is it's sincere and it's honest, and you're not just selling a product, you're selling a purpose.
Yes.
And they're the ones that are really going to come out of this, I think, because that's what the consumer is going to warm to, a purpose.
Yeah, and I think potentially since the 2008 financial crisis, there's been, for as long as I've been sort of brand conscious, because I was in school then, there's been people are more suspicious of advertising and of brands in general, because it's like you say, you're looking for a short-term gain, you're looking to boost sales in the next quarter, but you're doing that at the expense of 10 years time. You're producing lots of plastic or you're doing whatever. So I think this is a really interesting strategy, and I do think it's going to be quite a popular one going forward. So maybe who knows, maybe you guys are at the front of a certain kind of curve, because I get what you're saying insofar as if you were looking at the sales figures for a company like Apple in the late 80s, early 90s, it wouldn't look good. But they had a sort of long idea, because it was just waiting for the marketplace to catch up for the internet to be able to facilitate the machines. So
I think you're right, and like I said, you look back at the crash, that happened, a few years ago. A lot of good stuff came out of that. A lot of kind of social media apps, popped up. A lot of brands did well, and it's something that I've been thinking about recently. It's almost, from a creative perspective, it's almost taken this global pandemic to lift the curse of creativity. Because you said we live in an age of short-termism, but also I felt that creativity was getting sucked out of the industry, it was getting sucked out of the process, and we're very much focused around, we're data-driven. We're driven by insights and research, which is great, but at the end of the day, what consumers buy into, and I would say this, is kind of creativity, something that sparks their imagination, that involves them. And I do feel out of this, there does feel to be a kind of resurgence in kind of creativity and crafts. And I think even where you guys come in, I think rather than, we live in this age of short-termism, like I said, and we live in this kind of skip ad culture where my 2-year-old son can skip an ad that I've done, or he can put on silence so he can't hear the beautiful work that you guys do. I think we're going to come out of this with a more of an appreciation for kind of craft and creativity, which I'm all for.
I hope so, because with regards to the increased targeting of advertising, more and more specific, zooming in further and further onto your end user, I'm actually starting to get a little bit frustrated as a consumer with that strategy. I get frustrated every time I go on YouTube and I have to watch 2 5-second pre-rolls, but not only that, it's because they've tried to guess what I like, and sometimes inaccurately. And I think it was Rory Sutherland who said that casting a broad net might be a better idea, because you have to invest more in the creative because you don't know exactly who's going to see it, so it has to be more ingenious because whoever's seeing it has to respond to it. Whereas if you're going direct to your consumer, it's like, here's what we think you're going to be interested in, and you're going to respond to exactly this kind of message, so it becomes more prescriptive and less creative.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this whole kind of myth about the creativity has to be original, I kind of disagree with it, really. I think with music you can be truly original, but with creativity, because you're selling to a mass market, it's very difficult to kind of pinpoint someone's humor or someone's emotion. And to me, it's taking something that's inspired you, taking a little bit of originality, taking something taking something you don't know, and injecting a whole heap of personality into that. I think that's kind of the key to a kind of a creative, rather than just has to be uniquely original, because if it's original, it will just fall on deaf ears. So it's taking something but kind of adding your own spin to it, and giving it sort of something that's got kind of mass appeal. But it's a tricky one, because like I said, nowadays the consumer is the brand. They can tear a brand apart through a tweet. It's kind of, they are, so it's very difficult. And that's exactly to your point. It almost annoys me now, like that was content's the key word, but it shouldn't be. Content's just a channel. It should be, to me, it should be like, I don't know, conversation. And we should be having a two-way conversation. And the consumer should be the voice of the brand. And that's going back to what we were saying before about, if you actually start to invite them in and involve them in stuff, and they almost become, it's user-generated content, and it not only builds that long-term kind of brand loyalty, but they feel part of it. You've got that emotional connection, rather than just selling them a 6-second ad that they can skip, or it winds them up when it's not talking directly to them. Again, you've got to understand the consumer, got to understand their journey, and in return, they start to buy into you from an emotional connection.
Not to put you on the spot, but can you think of an example, maybe one or two brands where I was going to say the customers, but I might even say the fan base feel like they are part of it. They don't feel like they buy it, but they feel like they're on that. It's like supporting a football team, where they really feel invested in the brand. An obvious one for me is Apple. It's always, that was are you Mac or PC was still a relevant debate when I was at school, but I don't know.
I think that's exactly it. Funny enough, I was reading an article last night, and Apple sprung to mind for me, because with Apple you buy into an ecosystem. Now I would go and buy a pair of these.
Yeah.
Regardless if I can get them £100 cheaper. It's just you're almost brainwashed into it, because you're buying into their ecosystem. And what's brilliant with them is they make you feel like you're invested in the future. Everything they do is almost like, come with us. We know this is the new earphones. This is the new laptop. And it's exactly that. You feel like you're on a journey with them. You feel like you need to get the first phone, the first headphones, because you are leading that brand. I think that's kind of a prime example. Similar thing to kind of, the sneakers, I guess, as well. You've got Adidas and you've got Nike, and because now, I'll probably say Adidas more than Nike, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm biased, but because you've got these kind of you've got these big kind of drops, you've got these collabs, you've got these launch parties, similar thing, you feel that you're wearing their product first more than anyone else. And because you are, same with Apple, you want to share that, you want to celebrate it. And that's where social media comes in. That's where the application of an idea comes in. And that's where brands who are thinking longer are have got the longevity.
Great. Well, I want to pull us in a different direction, because as you know, we are all about music, and nominally this is all about music. And you said that you would love to talk about music. So I'd, probably lead in by saying, give me a few of your top records, maybe one that changed the direction of your life, maybe one that if someone asks you right now what's favourite record, it probably comes into your head. I don't know, but talk to me about your music taste.
You know what? It was really interesting, because I'm a massive music nut, and I always go back to. It got me thinking today, actually, about like music, especially now you're kind of stuck indoors, and I could go weeks or days without booze, football, junk food, but I don't think I've ever gone a day by without music. It's so integral to me. And, I go back to, Northern Soul, a way of life. That's so apt. Do you know what I mean? It's such a, so I love music, and especially sort of like, being indoors, being that, to me, it's like the ultimate time machine. It just triggers memories. It takes you back. It reminds you of people. And I think that's quite important, in this current climate, because it's just quite a time to reflect. So it's been a backdrop to my lockdown. Not only because I've got 2 kids and it drowns them out, but, it's just been really good. I think, so to go back to your original kind of question, is there a record that changed my life? I think, I don't know where to start. And I think the way I look at it, it's more music that has kind of guided my life. I think it's probably the better one. And I've always seen music as like movement rather than genres. I've always been attracted to like the subcultures, and it's the style and the sounds. But because of my age, I've always seemed to have missed out on the subculture. I've always been like 3 years too late to a subculture. So when I grew up, it always, I guess I was kind of heavily influenced by Stones, Bowie, Clash, Specials. That's my go-to music. My parents were big into music, and they played it, so it just rubbed off on me. But it was almost that kind of rebellious music, Johnny Cash. So I guess when I was kind of in the late 80s, that was when I was growing up. But I think when it really hit me was probably the early to mid 90s. That was kind of my teenage years. And up until then, like I said, I was always kind of flitting between kind of like these different kind of movements, looking back at the punk, the ska, the rave, and everything was kind of a little bit disjointed in my kind of, my head. And then I guess it kind of got to like the mid 90s or the early to mid 90s when it almost, I guess, everything kind of came, it was like a perfect storm. I love guitar-based bands. And then you had this kind of electronic stuff coming in. So where I was growing up, it was kind of the big rave scene was happening. So like early Prodigy was coming in. Obviously you had the big Manchester scene, like the Stone Roses, I almost kind of feel that like the mid 90s was just kind of the point where something clicked, where if you look at a band like the Stone Roses, now they came on to Stone Love, Northern Soul, very mod focused, but then they had like Paul Oakenfold's, opening for them, mixing their albums. And I think that to me was almost like the point, whereas it wasn't a record that kind of changed my life, but everything kind of came together, and it was that kind of perfect storm of like, you don't have to sit with a specific genre. And it was when, bands started, mixing with DJs. And I think that was almost like the turning point of my life, where I was like, holy shit, it all fits together now. And then it starts to take you on a different journey of like, well, they like Northern Soul, where does that go? I love sort of the house scene, and the dance music was just immense there. And you look at the Glastonbury lineups, the mid to late 90s, it was just, some of the albums coming out, some of the dance scenes down here, some of the music up north, it was just kind of a melting pot. And I think that to me was probably like, wouldn't say it's a record, but there's too many to choose from. But that was a time when it's kind of everything just clicked into gear, and I was like, yeah, this is it for me.
I feel like as well at that particular time that you're referring to, especially with the acts that you've mentioned, it was it was a thriving time for artists from the UK, both from London and from elsewhere. Yeah. It's very much, I feel like it's quite dominated by American artists at the moment, because we're in a something of a second wave of hip hop, absolute hip hop dominance. So you've got your Post Malones, you have your Drakes, you have Travis Scott, you have all these people annihilating the charts. But I feel like at the time you were describing, there's a real massive thing going on in London and in the UK. So we talked about Prodigy, but you could talk about Blur, you could talk about the Charlatans, the Stone Roses, Oasis, and it goes on from that point. And then as you say, all the electronic artists, all the DJs, and so. No. I was just going to say, what was there something in the water at the time, or what do you think was going on?
I don't know. I mean, I thinking. I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about. I don't know. I think everything just came together. I think there was a freedom. I think it felt like a freedom and a rebellion in a way, where and it goes back to kind of like the movement. Right, there was no genre really. Everyone was like indie or Britpop or dance, but it kind of was amalgamation. And to me, it was kind of like, it was more like the culture. It felt like the UK had something, and like I never really brought into like the Oasis or the Blur, the North or the South. It felt a little bit kind of media driven, but you had Noel Gallagher, with the Chemical Brothers, you had like Oakenfold. Like, it was just a really great time, and it was, I think the fashion, the music, the whole culture around it. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you could bottle it, you'd go back there. It was just an awesome time. And I think also there was, like I said, there was a freedom. There didn't feel like, you look at some of the Oasis lyrics now, and even look at the bands like Ocean Colour Scene, who was kind of almost, they reinvented like the mods, and Weller was doing his own thing, going solo, and I think Primal Scream are a very underrated band, and what they were doing, they were sort of fusing that kind of dance with kind of indie. It just felt like kind of a really good time to explore where they could take their inspirations. I think that was what I was going back to, where if you're not following genres, it just started to take you on this kind of musical journey. And then because of that, you'd sort of then go and maybe find out a love for, again, Northern Soul, or you go and look into hip hop, like you said, because there was a lot of collabs going on at the time. And probably similar going back to like when I was a bit younger, you know, and because if you've got an appreciation in music, especially with my family, there was this freedom to explore it. And when I was growing up, they always had these, you know, I don't know if it was the late 80s, it was this kind of parental advisory, explicit lyrics on the tapes then. And going back to like the early hip hop, I got into that in a big way because at the time you had NWA, you had Public Enemy, you know, amazing albums, you know, and as a white kid from down south, listening to this kind of like black American hip hop. And then they started to partner up with like Anthrax and the rock bands. Do you know what I mean? It was just kind of a really good fusion. And I think it was quite a cultural education point for me, you know, and especially in the current climate, it was just, like I said, it was kind of, it felt like a freedom, but a rebellion as well.
Yeah, so it feels like maybe every 20 years or so, there's a form of the spirit that brought punk about re-emerges. So, because I feel like the artists you mentioned there, I mean, obviously NWA, and their reservations about authority, in particular the police, it's very anarchic, which again shares some of the, it shares at least a spiritual relation to punk, even if it's not directly related. And then I'm seeing that again now. I was saying to someone on one of these recently, I went to see a young rapper called Octavian from London. He's on Black Butter Records. I saw him at the Academy, and I'm 27, but I'm already too old to stand anywhere near the front on those kind of gigs because everyone's like 16. But that looked like a punk gig from the back. The silhouette was just chaos, and I was like, this comes every 20 years or so. It just goes mad, and then you get an impression of it. So I felt like when I was in school, 2004 to 2009, that was like the landfill indie era. We had loads of hives, vaccines, you had scouting for girls and all this type of stuff, and it looked like an impression of the actual rebellion. It looked like an impression of the thing that you were experiencing in the 90s, but not the real thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, maybe it's my age, I don't know. But again, it all felt a bit safe. It all felt a bit samey, you know, and this is where I quite like, you know, going back to that kind of rebellion. And again, it goes back to kind of movements rather than genres, you know, and that's what kind of attracted me to like, you know, like the sort of the hip hop, you know, the punk, the ska. There was a cultural point to it. You know, there was a reason for writing this music because they wanted to get their viewpoint across, whether or not you were kind of, you know, in the punk scene, in kind of like the hip hop scene, whether it might be the ska scene. There was kind of a point. It almost felt like culture was making you address these issues, and maybe we haven't really got that. So maybe I'm wrong, but the music, it doesn't feel like it resonates as much anymore. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it just felt like quite raw and quite kind of honest. And again, you know, I guess that's probably what gravitates me towards those type of kind of bands and artists. And maybe that going back to sort of like the late 80s, early 90s, that there was a lot to say. There was a lot of issues, and these bands weren't afraid, should we say, of talking about it.
Yeah, and obviously at the time we're speaking, it's the 4th of June 2020, and I can't help but sense sort of in the air that we might be about to enter another one of those periods of time, because obviously we have this today in particular, we have this trivector of issues, because we've got coronavirus and we all feel quite frustrated and pent up because of that, and people have responded with various levels of effectiveness across, you know, various governments. So the US have handled it in their way, we've handled it in our way, New Zealand, Germany, whatever. There's a bit of antipathy about coronavirus, but we also have the climate issue, which was dominating the headlines last year, and there's a youth movement around that because of the Greta Thunberg moment. And then in the last week, we've had an enormous the news gravitational pull has been all on George Floyd, the death of George Floyd, and how African Americans feel they're regarded or represented in the US. So I feel like, you know, there's just enough things rubbing up against each other to create another one of these moments.
It does feel like that. It just feels something's bubbling, and it feels like there's enough anger to. I heard a brilliant quote the other day. It was, you can't enjoy the rhythm but ignore the blues. You know, in relation to that. And I thought it was brilliant. And it kind of encapsulated it perfectly. And then, you know, if you're looking back at kind of culture at the moment, and I guess, you know, what we're talking about, music is predominantly, if you go back far enough, it is, black orientated music has been pretty much, it's kind of leading in terms of whether it's kind of soul, whether it's funk, whether it's ska, whether it's hip hop. You could see, even looking at the Stones, how they're heavily influenced by, without a doubt, and the Clash, the punk scene. It all starts kind of. So, and again, but all that was kind of started with anger, because these bands had something to say and they weren't getting heard, so they turned to music. So, as much as it's a very sad situation that we sort of find ourselves in, and it's worrying, I do feel that hopefully a movement will come out of this. It's positive, and if it's based around kind of music or a culture, then it will probably get a lot more people listening to the message rather than kind of protesting and doing it in sort of violent ways.
Yeah. We'll see where it goes. But it definitely feels like we are at a point of some kind of node, some kind of thing where things are about to turn in a different direction. So I'll be interested to see how it pans out. Should we just take a little bit of time here to talk about we've talked about the creative world, we've talked a bit about the music world. Should we talk about when those two things collide? And when do you think what comes to mind if I ask you what's the best music choice in an advert that you've seen?
Well, sort of two spring to mind for me. I do love the Durex "Let's Get It On" by Marvin Gaye. That worked on every level. Genius. But I think the one that absolutely springs out to me is Guinness, the surfer ad. Which is just featuring Left Field's Fat Planet. It's just amazing. I didn't realise actually it was never a single, but I think because of the advert, it made it so big, which is, I guess, the power of advertising, which is great. And that 2-note bass line, that kind of distorted, it just made your bollocks tingle. Excuse my language. And it was a true work of art. And what was interesting about it was, as soon as you heard it, you wanted to go clubbing, but the last thing you want to do when you go to a club is have a pint of Guinness. But who cares? Because it was kind of a weird, I just think it was, it was a true work of art. And I think it probably wouldn't have worked without the music. And it was just such a beautiful piece of work. And again, Levi's done some great ones. There's some good music, but I think that one for me was just the standout one, because just because of the way it was crafted, the way it was built, and just just the music, just the intro of Fat Planet was just on point.
Yeah, when I spoke to Hugh Todd about this, he said the way it felt was that it was composed bespoke for the advert, just as this little rise of sound design, because it rises like the wave in Surfer, of course, and then when when it delivers its message, here's to waiting, and then it's really loud, overwhelming.
It was just worked really well, and when I first saw it, I kind of likened it to like the Heartbeat. I don't know, it was something quite nice about it. So again, it got you on an emotional level as well, but it was just one of those ads where you just wanted to turn it up and you wanted to go out and you wanted to go clubbing. So that was brilliant.
I think Guinness have had really great marketing almost non-stop since then. They're doing something really well. Obviously they work with Abbott Mead Vickers. I think they still work with them, but I think it's the Surfer commercial on a few levels was quite clever, because like you say, Guinness isn't the kind of thing you have on a night out, but it became associated with hardcore surfing. Cool. Again, surfers are not going to drink Guinness. It's it repositions it like in a single stroke. And also the thing that probably many people in brand and just in general people who make products are trying to do is how to turn something that is a problem with the product into one of the charms and one of the benefits. And one of the problems with Guinness is you have to wait forever for it to be poured, and they made that the thing. Here's to waiting. Exactly.
Well, you can go for a surf or a horse ride. That's the advert was doing it. But it was just a really powerful ad, and I think that was it. That to them was, to your point, it was sort of the tipping point, and they became more kind of culturally relevant. Whereas before, everybody thought it was like an old man down the pub having a Guinness on a Sunday. It just felt like probably trying to address kind of a modern or a younger crowd and be part of kind of culture.
Yeah, which of course is presumably in at your level of things when you're the creative and you're trying to figure out what the message is going to be. Presumably that's happened so much, they're saying our brand's kind of getting old and we need to really give it some new blood.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's kind of what we come back to, sort of, the thinking longer. I think that's what agencies should be doing. They should be kind of future gazing. They should be looking to the future. They should be kind of leading and sort of like coaxing your clients into where they should be going. And again, it's not just a case of looking at kind of what everyone else is doing, looking at new channels. It's looking at kind of culture and then your consumer and where they're going. And if you can start to sort of align them up, it gives kind of a fresh impetus to the actual clients.
Where do you think things are going this year? Not just on a societal level, because no one can make predictions, but what do you see happening for brands and for creative over the next 6 months or maybe even the next year?
With brands, who knows? I guess it's kind of like, it's a tricky one for brands because they're going to have to sell, they're going to have to market, they're going to have to advertise. It's just, how are they going to do it and where are they going to do it? And I think our job now is to look at kind of positives coming out of this pandemic. From a physical perspective, you made a point earlier, the uplift in digital and online and commerce and social media apps is massive. So I think a lot of consumers have got trust in brands, e-commerce, and social platforms. So I think that will be a big driver going forward. So it's then just maybe starting to look at kind of the innovation and the tech around the digital side of things, starting to bring back the physical space, I think. Before the pandemic, experiential was a big thing.
Yes.
How can we do that now with social distancing? I think that's going to be a problem. So how can we maybe look at kind of experiential from a digital and a tech perspective? I think it's probably going to be an interesting challenge as well.
Yeah.
And I think probably from a brand perspective, the ones who come out of this are the ones who have really kind of, like I said, kind of sold their purpose or lived their purpose through this time. So I think a lot of consumers are brought into brands that have kind of sold their purpose rather than their product. So it'd be interesting to see how consumers react to that going forward. And I guess then from a creative perspective, I kind of feel that, like I said before, I think creativity's come out of this really well. And I think also, hopefully, we'll have more of a chance to sort of craft more products or more kind of campaigns. Like we said before, we do live in a skip ad culture. We live in a kind of an age of short-termism. We kind of felt that, creative was kind of slightly, being stifled because of, it was just it was very quick, it was very rushed. Going back to the Guinness ads, would that be created now? Probably not, because you haven't got the time or the budget. But is there a way of bringing that kind of craft and that kind of creativity into something that's kind of fits in with kind of the age of kind of short-termism? So I think it'll be an interesting place to be. I think at the heart of it, I still think it'll be ideas and innovation going forward. You still need to have a clever idea and start to bring the innovation side into it as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's have some fun while we do it and see where it goes.
Yeah, and that is something I hear over and over again. It's ad infinitum. The one thing you can't get away from is a good idea.
Yeah, everything is around. Everything rolls around an idea. And I think, like I said, hopefully the curse of creativity will have been lifted through all this, and essentially everyone buys into an idea. And again, if we can start to kind of take the findings from this pandemic and start to bring in kind of the digital, the social, the amplification, how do we attract clients, how do we get them involved, I think we'll be in a good place.